but we haven't been able to see a lot of practice, Joey. But I don't know how much drama you thought there actually was in this quarterback battle, but it seemed pretty clear all along, especially with what we saw in the spring with Luke Altmyer getting so many first-team reps that he was going to be the guy. So what's your reaction to Altmyer being named the starting quarterback?
Probably about the same as yours. I'm not necessarily surprised. I would have been floored if Brett Bielema stood up there and said it was somebody else. Luke Altmyer was brought in to be a starter. He came to Illinois to be a starter. Now, if he came and airmailed everything for 4 months, then you have to look differently. But it sounds like he was continuing to improve in camp. I don't think anything, as we've seen with the announcement today, happened to make us think otherwise. We haven't heard anything otherwise. Not the most suspenseful. We'll get to the backup job. That was always the most I guess the biggest question we had, but not a surprise, man. And there's short-term, and if things go well for Luke Altmyer, long-term ramifications for him being named Illinois starting quarterback.
Well, here, let's play Brett Bielema, what he said about Luke Altmyer being his starter.
We will announce today Luke Altmyer will be our starting quarterback going into the Toledo game. We've really had, even last spring through all this fall, I've been very impressed with the quarterback room in general. To have Barry back as a returning coordinator, but also our QB coach, I think has brought a lot of continuity to that room, even though we got new faces. Luke sat down and visited with all three of our quarterbacks, are really the Luke Altmyer, John Paddock, and Donovan Leary. And to be quite honest, Kirk Lamisha has had a really good spring and summer. But those three guys, I think in particular, have proven to me what they can do and what they will do. I told all of them, obviously, Luke with his role as a starting quarterback. I've been very impressed on not just his play on the football field, but kind of how he's handled. I think to walk into this environment, to have a lot of people from the outside world think he's going to be that guy, and to stand in front of his team, to give cadence as a quarterback, to speak in the huddle, but also on the sideline in the locker room. I thought he's just really done a nice job of balancing all that. And so we talked in detail about what that was going to be from this point moving forward. And then obviously John Paddock, I thought he probably played one of his best weeks of football last week, and the competition has definitely made everybody in the room stronger, and very impressed with John, not only, again, with what he's done on the field, but he's, type A mentality, personality, everything, got great leadership qualities, all the things that you ask for in a quarterback, he shines through, and has been very, very efficient with our offense, and I think the respect that our guys have on the field for him is big. And then Donovan Leary in particular, a guy that's going into a second fall with us, but last year redshirted, this year going into his redshirt freshman years, really put together a nice little run, especially this last week. He by far, again, I think on Friday night played his best football that I've seen him play. So as a whole, that room I'm very impressed with, see where it can go.
So that's Brett Bielema, and no surprise here. Again, Luke Altmyer, we saw in the spring when we had a couple open scrimmages, Joey took almost all the first-team reps. Donovan Leary got some first-team reps as well in the practices that we saw, but he was clearly the most talented quarterback. And that's not a shock. He's a former four-star prospect. The pedigree is there. But what has impressed me with Luke Altmyer is he's got one of the quickest deliveries. I think him and John Paddock probably had the quickest delivery. But his ability to place the ball, his ability to make all the throws, and not that he's got the biggest cannon of an arm in the world, but he can put it where he wants to, and he usually does. The touch he has on these throws. And then the other part is he's really the best, most mobile quarterback they have. He's going to be able to make plays with his legs. I don't think they want him taking a bunch of hits because a little slight of frame at 6'2", 200 pounds, but he clearly shined in the spring when we saw him talent-wise. And while he's not the most vocal of the top three options for sure, he seems to have grown on people, and he seems to do enough on the field in terms of his work ethic, in terms of his ability, that John Paddock was not going to upset him here just because you got to have talent at this position, and he is by far the best talent, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly what we thought coming in. He's not the most vocal, but it does seem like over the course of the last, since he's been here, right? It's been a slow, maybe a decently paced progress of growing into that role. The guys say he's grown into it, and those things take time. That's kind of been the message that we've gotten, that, hey, he's fine. Like, everyone seems to like the guy. It just takes time to step into that, especially when you walk into an experienced locker room that's been together for a while. Guys have already had established voices. Your Johnny Newtons, Isaiah Williams, Keith Randolph, Casey Washington. Those voices, those don't just go away because there's a new quarterback in town. You have to find your footing in there, and it sounds like he's done that. And again, we talked about this last time. A lot of people buy into you as a leader if you're making passes and you're making plays and moving the ball. I think that's ultimately what matters. And That's why there's part of me that really, every time the vocal thing comes up, I do roll my eyes because the guys respect him. And
Yeah,
if you can make the throws, you can make the throws.
I would push back a little bit on that because this is the one position where it really does matter.
Sure.
Because these coaches talk about it, right? Brett Bielema brought it up all the time with Brandon Peters. And from what I've heard from people around the program, he's more outgoing, more outward than Brandon Peters was, who was just a reserve guy. But Brandon was by far the most talented guy in that room. But if it becomes to a point where the play isn't good enough and you're not getting enough leadership and fire from that position, I think that showed with Brandon Peters at times, that he just didn't lead the team at certain times when you just needed the quarterback, either one, to make that throw or fire the team up. But some guys just don't have it in them, and that's fine. But John Paddock's got that fire, and we hear about it from the teammates, and I think that matters. Tommy DeVito had that. Tommy DeVito came into the Illinois quarterback room last year and owned the room. I don't think Luke Altmyer did that, but I think Luke Altmyer gradually has grown into that role of being the QB1, of the guy everyone respects because of his work ethic, because of his ability, because of his talents, his ability to make these throws and to lead them to success ultimately. But I do know the staff wants him to be a little bit more outward and to take more of a leadership role. And now I think he is fully cleared to do that as he is named the starter. But they do want to see, from what I've heard, more swagger. They want to see a little bit more swagger. But he's not Tommy DeVito, and that very few people are. But John Paddock brings that as well. So I think it is worthy of bringing up because the coaching staff wants more of it out of him. But I agree with you. If you have the talent, if you make the throws, if you score touchdowns, no one's really going to care about that other stuff. Because when Brandon Peters played well, nobody cared that he wasn't the most outward guy as long as he was making plays. The problem wasn't enough consistent playmaking.
Yeah, and look, let's be honest. Most quarterbacks are going to fall between Tommy DeVito and Brandon Peters. Like, we're talking about two pretty different ends of the vocal spectrum here. And I think Luke Altmyer probably fits in a lot of ways where a lot of quarterbacks would. But look, when you actually get named the starter, and that's out there, and come on, I would have to imagine most of the Smith Center knew.
Yes.
Long before Brett Bielema officially told them, like, you probably do have a little bit more comfort in being louder and doing that. Like, once it's officially, look, we have to look back at his time, right? Like, he probably could have won one of those jobs, won the starting quarterback job last year. Like, you want to make sure you've got this, I would assume, before you go full screaming mode or whatever, is the desired output from a quarterback.
Yeah, and when it comes to Altmeyer, I mean, we've had the quarterback podcast. We broke him down, but I think he's got one of the most enticing skill sets and ceilings of any Illinois quarterback of the last 10 years. Tommy was really good for them. Brandon was very talented. Wes Lunt had a great arm. When you talk about overall skill set when it comes to accuracy, the ability to have that deep ball with the touch he does, and with his mobility, that's one of the most well-rounded skill sets Illinois has had at the position. And he's got a little bit of experience. It's just the wild card is here. He's unproven. I mean, he's played in the Sugar Bowl. He's played some games. So he's got it in him, Joey, to compete at this level. He's just never been the starting quarterback of a team. I think he could have put up similar numbers to Jackson Dart last year at Ole Miss in that offense. And he pushed Jackson Dart into the season before he had an injury in his first start. And Luke wasn't all that great in that start against a lower-level opponent. But I think he's got it in him to be one of Illinois' better quarterbacks of the last decade, which isn't a huge thing because Tommy DeVito probably would be that guy. But I think he could be really good. I just think you're going to have to deal with some growing pains early on. But that's okay because you can grow from those growing pains not only in the short term, but in the long term because he's got 3 years of eligibility left. That's a beautiful thing about this.
Yeah, and you've got talent, we think, around him to help alleviate some of those growing pains. But I think the big thing, and it's what we talked about when he committed, it's what we've talked about since he committed, he's got 3 years of eligibility. And if he doesn't use those, things have probably gone very well for Illinois, or very poorly, I guess, if you don't ask him to do that. But to solidify this, where if you can avoid turning over quarterback every year, if you can get a returner who's talented and not jump on the portal carousel, which has been fruitful with Tommy DeVito, and Illinois hopes it is with Luke Altmyer, by having that continuity of your quarterback back, your coordinator back, some playmakers back, depending on how this shakes out for Illinois. That's a big deal moving forward. And again, it allows maybe that natural development of a guy like Donovan Leary behind him to get those reps and and get himself ready for taking over if that's what it comes down to for Luke Altmyer.
Yeah, and the one thing Barry Loney told me was that he hopes in year 2 of his system, all these other pieces around him can help elevate Luke in the early going. And then when Luke gets caught up and gets comfortable on the field and off, that he can elevate everybody else. And I do agree with you, Joey. This is the best supporting cast an Illinois quarterback has had in a long time. When you consider you have 3 all Big Ten offensive linemen returning and just Brett Bielema's teams are good at it. Bart Miller's a really good O-line coach. You have a running game that should be pretty good. Maybe you don't have a Chase Brown, but I think this running game is going to be pretty good, and I think Altmeyer will add to that. And you have the best wide receiver room Illinois has had, or most talented and deepest wide receiver room Illinois has had. I think we talked about in the last podcast, since like Geronimo Allison, Mikey Dudek, Malik Turner. Like
It's been almost 10 years.
Yeah, it's almost been a decade. So I think there's a good group around him. I don't think it's obviously one of the top half Big Ten groups, but it's a competent Big Ten offensive supporting cast, I think, around him, with a star like Isaiah Williams, with a future star we think in Malik Elzy. Pratt Bryant, they think, could be an NFL guy. Like, there's multiple NFL guys, I think, around him that eventually play at this level. So I don't think Luke Altmyer is set up like Brandon Peters, go carry it, or Wes Lunt, go carry it. I don't think it's quite the setup. Like, he can be a game manager in the early going, potentially, make a few plays. Just don't make the big mistakes. I think that's what they're going to ask out of him, is don't make the big mistakes and grow into the role.
Yeah. And look, I think a lot of that is what they asked of Tommy DeVito too.
Yep.
Remember when Tommy DeVito got here, I don't want to use the term gunslinger because I don't know if that's 100% fair, but he was not as careful, I think, at times in practice with the ball as they wanted him to be, or just the way he approached things. And they kind of got him. And I think we've heard Brett Bielema and Barry Lunny mention Luke Altmyer adjusting to what they want to do. And I don't know if it's exactly 1-to-1, but they're probably going to ask him in those early stages to, like you said, don't put it on the ground, don't put it in the other team's hands, and we'll be able to trust the guys around you. And again, if you can make a big throw, do it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, go find Pat Bryant somewhere. But there's going to be a time to let him get there. It's just how many mistakes are in the process of him getting there, because I think we've talked about it before with him and a number of other positions. Middle of October, Luke Altmyer is going to look a heck of a lot different than September 2nd, Luke Altmyer, because he's going to have more reps by then than he's had in his entire career.
Yeah. All right, back up. That was the battle I think we've all along said was more interesting. And I think this had the predictable ending, but I do think this was a decent competition at one point. But Joey, you followed up with Brett Bielema, who's the backup, and he said, as of now, John Paddock would probably be the guy that would come up next. So what do you think of John Paddock beating out Donovan Leary there?
Very Art Sikowski last year. I know we've talked about that before. And Brett Bielema's mentioned it a few times since we really started talking to him again at the end of July. Art Sikowski's ability to go in there and beat Nebraska, help beat Penn State when Brandon Peters was out, and his ability against Iowa a year ago, that mattered in a really, really big way to Brett Bielema. I think he saw a quarterback who maybe wasn't as physically gifted as some other quarterbacks who have been out there, but he's had experience. He's been through there. Somebody that they trusted to not make mistakes in case there's a mid-game quarterback change. I think that mattered, and I think that leaned into John Paddock winning this job. And John Paddock, Brett Bielema said, had a good week last week. He's a guy who's been around. As you mentioned, his leadership. You probably, in an ideal world long term, would you like your redshirt freshman to come in and win that backup job in Donovan Leary? Of course, right? But you also have to be practical, and this is a big year to build that momentum, to keep that momentum sustained. And if that answer is a more experienced guy coming in for a half, a quarter, if it's multiple games, we'll see if that comes down to it. Obviously, Illinois hopes it does not. Then you want somebody who's been through there and who has started. He started 12 games last year for Ball State. Like that's important.